Hello, librarians, and happy Tuesday to you all. My name is Chris Vicari of Union Square and Company, and on behalf of my fellow publishers at the Hachette Book Group, Soho Press, and Norton Company, as well as our authors here today, I welcome you to the second annual A Book for Every Reader virtual event. Over the next hour or so, you will be hearing from four wonderful authors, all with books coming out soon that you will want on the shelves of your library. And that's not all. After our authors speak, you will get a 5-minute book buzz, a sneak peek, if you will, from each sponsoring publisher, as Annie, Erica, Golda, and I tell you titles that will be hot, hot, hot in the months to come. Joining us here as well to introduce our authors is our host, our friend, our moderator from the Hunterdon County Public Library in beautiful Flemington, New Jersey. Please give a warm Book for Every Reader virtual welcome to Jennifer Winberry. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Erica, Annie, and Golda for having me back. The first author I'd like to introduce today is Katharine Beutner, whose book Killingly will be published on June 6th by Soho Crime. Katharine's debut novel, Alcestis, was an Edmund White Debut Fiction Award. Her writing has appeared in Tinfish, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Public Books, the Toast Tri-Quarterly, Humanities, and other publications. She is an assistant professor of English at the College of Worcester in Ohio. She has a BA in Classical Studies from Smith and an MA in English Creative Writing and a PhD in Literature from the University of Texas at Austin. Recently, she received an Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award and is the editor-in-chief of the Dodge, a magazine of eco-writing and translation. Thank you, Katharine.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I am so happy to be here today to tell you a little bit about my novel, Killingly. So it is a queer historical crime novel that was inspired by the true story of the disappearance of Bertha Mellish from Mount Holyoke College in 1897. I'm a Smith alum myself, so for folks who don't know Smith or Mount Holyoke, they are women's colleges that are a little bit down the road from each other in Massachusetts. So when I stumbled across a headline about Bertha disappearing, I was just delighted and kind of shocked. I had never heard about it, so I was really excited to learn more. Because I'm talking to librarians today, I'm going to give you the inside librarian scoop on how I found this in the archives. I was, as Jennifer just mentioned, I did a PhD in 18th century British literature, nerd stuff, and I was working as a research intern at the Harry Ransom Center at UT Austin, which is a big rare books and manuscript archive. And patrons could write in with queries, and they could get an hour of our time for free to do research and answer their questions. And so it will not surprise you as librarians to know that along with the sort of more academic questions and sometimes really exciting ones, I would come in the morning and I would pick up something from the research intern inbox that was, I'm writing my Walt Whitman monograph. Can you please go check on this letter in the Whitman archive so I can fix my citation? Like, I will absolutely do that at 9 a.m. It was very exciting. We also got a lot of genealogical queries. And so I had taken one of those, it was my turn. And it was the broadest possible question, like something like, I think one of my ancestors was somehow involved in the Spanish-American War around 1900. Please look in the newspaper archives. And the Ransom Center did have microfilm of the Hearst papers that were being published in New York City around 1900 with no index. So I was scrolling and getting increasingly seasick. And I saw this headline, "Led to Death by Her Child of Fancy." First of all, I had no idea what that meant. And second of all, I hit print faster than you can believe. And it was an interview with the Mellish family doctor. So 3 years after Bertha disappeared, he was still looking for her and giving interviews about it. And that was really weird. And I really wanted to learn more about it. It turns out that no one knows what happened to Bertha Mellish. She was a minister's daughter from Killingly, Connecticut, which is where the title of the book comes from. It was just a gift from the universe. And reportedly, and I quote, the most peculiar, quiet, reserved girl at the college. So as I learned more about this, I just was 100% on board to fictionalize it and figure out how I wanted to tell a story about her. So I drew on real characters: Bertha, her much older sister Florence, her father, the Reverend, the family Dr. Hammond, whose obsession with her seems a little disturbing to me, and a private investigator who was hired by the family to try to find her. And I also created new characters. So a lot of college girls at Mount Holyoke are fictionalized. And most importantly, a fictional best friend for Bertha, whose name is Agnes Sullivan. So she is a fellow striver, I guess is probably the best way to put it, who is hiding Bertha's secrets and her own. She's escaped poverty in Boston to come to the college, and she wants to be a surgeon. In real life, Bertha was an aggressive debater and a known agnostic, which were both pretty radical at the time. So they're outsiders in this insular social world. And 3 questions drive the book's plot. What happened to Bertha Mellish, obviously? What does Agnes Sullivan know about it? And then what would happen to Agnes if people found out the truth about what really happened? So I was really interested in exploring what life was like for academically ambitious young women at the turn of the 20th century, for a couple reasons. One was that there was so much cultural pushback that they were receiving about this idea of the new woman who was challenging so-called traditional gender roles. And of course, I was also really interested in looking more at the romantic friendships and crushes that, are evident in the girls' letters from the time. And they certainly read as queer to modernize. At the same time, I'm really interested in how these characters' understandings of sexual orientation and identity are really different from those that we have today. So I did research in the archives at Mount Holyoke Special Collections. They have some material on Bertha herself, and they also have these beautiful scrapbooks that were produced by other students who were there at the time, with photos, candids and quotes and programs from plays, and also a few less cool things, which I'm happy to talk about if anyone has archival curiosity. So obviously I'm really into that side of things. I love doing nerdy archival research, and this is the twisty, dark historical college novel that I always wanted to write. I'm a huge fan of Sarah Waters and Donna Tartt's Secret History, obviously, as well as Margaret Atwood's Alias Grace and A.S. Byatt's Possession and its many interwoven fictional documents, which is also something I do in this book. So those are the 4 mothers for the book. Its approach to POV, it's third-person omniscient, and there's a narrator who sometimes comments directly on what the characters are doing or what they're thinking or believing, is very much shaped by my obsessive grad school reading of Jane Austen and later Victorian novels. And I had a bookseller recently tell me that the novel's use of POV reminded her of Henry James, which, I will take it, thank you. But it's not at all an academic book. It is, except maybe in the sense of dark academia. I find it really funny. I started this book more than a decade ago and somehow managed to luck into publishing it in a moment where that vibe is sort of all around, at least according to my students who are on Book Talk. So it's an atmospheric, claustrophobic portrait of this women's college. It's not horror. I wouldn't call it horror. But I think of it as New England Gothic, so it's sort of adjacent to the tradition of Shirley Jackson. And it's very much an exploration of the social dynamics of this Gilded Age moment that Bertha and Agnes and Florence are trying to navigate as educated women. I feel like the Gilded Age is also kind of having a pop culture resurgence right now, which might be because we have a bit of a sense that we're in our own sort of weird, precarious Gilded Age. And I'm really interested in how historical fiction can excavate those resonances, while also, of course, creating a compelling story. So at its heart, this is a book about female friendship, relationships between women, and how women band together to survive loss and trauma. So I'm really excited that this book is coming out in the world. As I said, I've been working on it for a long time. I really hope you enjoy it. Jennifer mentioned my first novel, Alcestis, and I want to also note that Soho will be re-releasing that novel, which they originally published in 2010, later this fall. It is a queer retelling of a Greek myth. I was a little too early for the zeitgeist on that one. So look for that as well, a couple of months after Killingly. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming today.
Thank you, Catherine. And now I'd like to welcome Laura Grodstein. Hi, Laura. You're still on mute. Laura, you're up there. Great, thank you. Laura's book, We Must Not Think for Ourselves, Think of Ourselves, is coming out November 28th from Algonquin Books. So a little while to wait for that. She is the author of 4 previous works of fiction, including the New York Times bestselling novel, A Friend of the Family, which was also a Washington Post Best Book Pick, a New York Times Editor Pick, a Book Page Best Pick, and an Indies Next Pick. And she teaches creative writing at Rutgers University.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about We Must Not Think of Ourselves. In November of 1940, an historian, a Jewish historian named Emanuel Ringelblum, found himself in Warsaw, behind the gates as the Warsaw Ghetto was sealed. He had worked in his previous life, not only as an historian, but as someone really involved in social welfare. And he knew immediately that what was happening was a crisis, not only for the Jews of Warsaw, but for worldwide Jewishness or worldwide Jewry. After all, Warsaw was the second biggest center of urban Judaism in the world after New York City at that time. So as the gates closed, he looked around and he realized he had to write all of it down. And he gathered 32 that we know of intellectuals, rabbis, writers, journalists, artists. And he gave them notebooks and he said, I want you to write it all down, write everything down, take notes, find newspapers. There were still cafes that were operating in the ghetto somehow. Grab the menus, interview your friends, interview your coworkers. He tasked doctors, there were doctors and scientists in the ghetto, and he asked them to do the first real study on starvation. The Nazis only allowed the Jews 177 calories per day. Obviously, those are starvation rations. And so Ringelblum asked the scientific minds in the ghetto to please write down what happened to people as they didn't get enough food. By the way that people stayed alive was that the children would smuggle in and out underneath the gates at risks to their lives. The archivists, again, there were 32 that we know of, there might have been more. The archivists collected all this material, thousands and thousands of pages of it. They wrote down everything to deny the Nazis the last word on what they had done. In 1942, deportations started to Treblinka, 6,000 Jewish people a day starting in July. The Ringelblum Archive, they call themselves the Oneg Shabbat Archive. That means the joy of the Sabbath. They buried what they had in 10 aluminum boxes, huge boxes. But they kept writing. In 1943, in April of 1943, right before the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, whose 80th anniversary will be next month, they buried the rest of it in 3 huge milk cans. Days later, the ghetto was bulldozed after the unsuccessful uprising. Ringelblum escaped. He managed to live on the run for another year or so before finally being turned in, and he was killed with his wife and son. Of the 32 archivists that we know of, 3 survived. In 1946, 2 of those survivors dug up the 10 milk cans, the 10 aluminum boxes. Unfortunately, the material inside was quite degraded. But in 1950, they came back and they found 2 of the 3 gigantic milk cans. I say milk cans, it's sort of hard to envision what they look like, but they're about as tall as I am, 5'5"-ish and wide, and they were corroded on the outside, but they kept the materials safe. One is still buried somewhere under the streets of Warsaw, they say maybe under the Chinese embassy. In 2019, my nephew's bar mitzvah was celebrated with a family heritage trip to Warsaw, Poland, which is where both sides of my family come from. Walking around Warsaw, I'd heard the word palimpsest. Gore Vidal had published a autobiography called Palimpsest. I sort of understood the concept, but I never really knew what a palimpsest was. I couldn't envision it until you start walking around Warsaw, where you see underneath the white paint on a building, you can see that the barely traceable outlines of Hebrew or of Yiddish. You can see on many doorways, the sort of carve out where a mezuzah once hung. We think of Poland, I had always thought of Poland as a sort of monolithic culture, a white Catholic culture. But in the 1940s, before the war, it really wasn't. It was a very, very multicultural place with Ukrainians, Germans, Jews. Almost 10% of the population of Poland was Jewish. So it was really a very diverse and exciting place. And many of its people were gone. The war was a form of ethnic cleansing that left Poland a monolith. But it was really easy and really, really sad to see the remnants of the Jewish life that had once been there. And by the end of our many days in Warsaw, most of the family, there were 12 of us there, including some small kids, we were pretty tired, and 8 of the 12 went with all of our blessing to go check out the soccer stadium, because frankly enough it was getting heavy. And 4 of us, my parents, my sister, and myself, pressed onward with the heritage tour, and we found ourselves at a place called the Emanuel Ringelblum Archive, a place I had never heard of despite many years of Hebrew school. I walk into this building at 35 Plemeskia Street, across from what was the Great Synagogue. And I see written on the wall in Hebrew, Polish, and English, what we could not shout out to the world. And next to it is a map engraved on the wall of the Warsaw Ghetto. You realize when you're standing there that everything you're standing on is about 2 or 3 feet higher than the rest of the city, because it's all built on what was once the ghetto, the walls and the homes and the people. You walk into this room and you see the names of the 32 archivists. You walk past that room and you see the milk can illuminated. And then you can walk through tables and tables of information. You see the diary entries. I saw a watercolor that a mother named Margot Lichtenstein had done named Gela Lichtenstein had done of her daughter Margot. You saw the last wills and testaments of many of the archivists. You saw the desperate cries for attention. You saw the newspapers, you saw the menus, you saw everything. It brought a moment to life. And I didn't realize until then, I mean, I was so ignorant before I went to Poland. I thought the ghetto was a place you could still visit. I didn't know that the only reason we know anything about ghetto life is because of this archive. Otherwise, the Nazis did a pretty good job of making everything that they had done to these Polish Jews invisible. I said to my sister, we spent a long time there and there were translations available. So I was able to read a lot of the material. And I said to my sister as we were leaving the building, I said, Jessie, there are 1,000 novels in that room. And she said, are you gonna write one? And I said, I don't know how. I've never written historical fiction, and I've certainly never tackled anything like this. But I went home and I started, and the book will be on the shelves in April. I'm sorry, in November. And I really look forward to sharing all of their stories with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. That was an amazing story of archives, perfect for librarians. Next, I want to welcome Deborah Willis. Deborah's book, Girlfriend on Mars, will be published by Norton on June 13th. She has 2 acclaimed collections of short stories. She was a bookseller at Monroe's Books in Victoria, British Columbia, and a writer in residence at the Joy Kagawa House in Vancouver, the 2012-2013 Calgary Distinguished Writers Program writer in residence at the University of Calgary, and the writer in residence at MacEwan University in Edmonton. She currently works for Freehand Books in Calgary, and her work has appeared in the Virginia Quarterly Review, The Walrus, Zoetrope, and other publications. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you all for having me part of this event. These books sound incredible. I'm a former bookseller, so one of the things I miss about my years in a bookstore is getting to learn about the new releases before they come out. So this is really lovely to be here. And I'm so thrilled to be able to talk about my novel, Girlfriend on Mars. I have an advanced copy here. It's available in June. And I'll just tell you a bit about it. So the main character is Amber Kivinen, and she plans to move to Mars. Or at least she will move to Mars if she wins a chance to join Mars Now. This is the first human-led mission to Mars. She is competing with 23 other reality TV contestants from around the world for 2 seats on this human-led mission to Mars. And the show is sponsored by a billionaire named Jeff Task. So the winners of the show will be sent to Mars forever because the technology to come home just doesn't exist yet. And meanwhile, my other protagonist, Kevin, her boyfriend of 14 years, he was quite content going nowhere until Amber left him and their hydroponic weed business in order to go on this TV show. So he is tending to the plants in their absurdly overpriced Vancouver basement apartment and tuning into this show to find out why the love of his life is so determined to leave the planet and him behind. And of course, there are some relationship twists and turns. They're both tempted to get involved with other people. They're both struggling with what it means to love one person for the entirety of your life on Earth. Yeah, it's sort of a satirical tone and something of a love story. So I guess the book began for me actually 10 years ago. The idea came to me because there really was talk of a reality show that would send people to Mars. It was in the news, and I was shocked that hundreds of thousands of people applied because Mars is a very hostile environment. It's, I personally wouldn't want to live in a place where if you get exposed to the air, you have just 12 seconds to get to safety before your lungs explode. So I just became fascinated to try to figure out why a person would want to leave their friends and family. Why would they want to leave breathable air, gravity, water? What could push someone to consider leaving our beautiful home planet for such a deadly place? And if an ordinary person really did win a reality show and go to Mars forever, how would their loved ones on Earth feel about being left behind? So that was kind of the germ of the idea. And as I wrote, I sort of became more and more angry that billionaires exist in our world at all, and that many of them spend a lot of their resources on competitive rocket building. I mean, I guess it's not rocket science to suggest that there's something wrong with a world that's facing unprecedented environmental breakdown and economic inequality, and also tolerating men who hoard their wealth and use it to create, the space tourism economy. And then, of course, there's also nuance because space exploration technology has helped us to understand climate change. And there's something thrilling about exploring the universe. So all of these sort of questions were circling in my mind. The novel, I guess, came out of a place that was both personal and political for me. And with that in mind, the models I had for when I was writing the novel, I loved Paul Beatty's The Sellout. That was front of mind. I found it hilarious and politically astute and courageous. I also had George Saunders in mind. I find his work has this amazing balance of humor and heart. And I love the way he can capture the absurdity of our modern world so well. I also wanted to play with genre a bit to write a literary novel that nods towards science fiction because the final third of the novel is actually set on Mars. And of course, it's a book about reality TV, so I had television in mind, and I wanted the book to move quickly, to have a kind of fast-cut, fast-paced feel of television. And most of all, I knew that for the book to work, my main characters had to feel real. Kevin and Amber, readers had to be invested in their relationship. I had to ensure that the novel had emotional, psychological depth. So a lot of my inspiration came from the writers I've read my whole life, like Alice Munro and Richard Ford. when I say all this, I feel like, wow, I had big ambitions. I don't know if I fulfilled them, but I hoped the novel would be a page turner, a kind of political work of speculative fiction, a satirical, funny book, and most of all, a work of literary character-driven fiction. And as I wrote as well, I really realized that I was writing, I guess, for people like me, people who are struggling with climate grief, eco-anxiety, that cognitive dissonance that I think many of us are experiencing in this moment of living with great privilege and also great despair. And I wanted a novel that would remind me and remind readers that we are not alone in our fears. And in fact, I did a major revision of this novel last year in the months after my daughter was born, which was crazy. If you told me before I became a mom that I would be working on a novel while my baby napped in my lap, I probably would have cried. I mean, I did cry when I was doing it, but that sort of anger about inequality and the climate change fears became so much more potent after her birth. I really felt like motherhood just kind of broke me open. And I think the novel is stronger because of the changes I made once my little girl arrived and taught me about that huge power of love and connection. I think she made the book a more hopeful one because I really do believe our connections to each other are what will allow us to survive and thrive during challenging times. So anyways, thank you so much for having me. If you read the book, I truly hope you enjoy it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Deborah. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Patrick Worrall, whose book, The Partisan, will be released on April 25th by Union Square and Company. Patrick was educated at Worcester and King's College in Cambridge, United Kingdom. He has worked as a teacher in Eastern Europe and Asia. He's a newspaper journalist, a court reporter at Old Bailey, and the head of Channel 4 News' Fact Check. The Partisan is his first novel, and it already has a star from Publishers Weekly and an alliterative blurb from bestselling author Lee Childs. He called it immersive, intriguing, and intelligent, incredibly impressive, up there with the best in the genre. Patrick, are you?
Hello.
Hello, we can't see you.
Hi.
Can you put your camera on?
It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh dear.
I've got more of a face for radio anyway. Okay, that's me. There I am.
Yes.
That was worth the wait, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for having me. It's all those three books are absolutely fascinating, and it's an honor to be on the same bill. I don't quite know how I follow all that really, but I've written a book called The Partisan. I'm going to do this because I love the cover, and I think I'm allowed to say that because I didn't design it, obviously. And as you can probably guess from the cover, it's a thriller. I hope it's not entirely a run-of-the-mill thriller. I would like to think that it's a little bit different, and hopefully you might learn something about an interesting period of history that we don't normally hear about very often in the Western world. So this book is about a boy who meets a girl, and they meet at a chess tournament. They're both chess players, chess prodigies, and their eyes meet over the chessboard, and there's an instant intense attraction between them. But there's a little bit of a problem because it's 1961 and we're in the most tense, the most dangerous period of the Cold War, and he's a British boy and she's a Russian girl. And I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship where your folks don't get on with their folks. You know, there's a bit of friction there. If you imagine if you know, the two sets of in-laws want to annihilate each other with thermonuclear weapons, then you can imagine you know, the kind of fix that they're in. But of course, neither of the young heroes, Yulia is the Russian girl and Michael's the English boy, neither of them are quite what they see. Michael has a family connection to British naval intelligence, and Yulia is the daughter of the most powerful woman in the Soviet Union, the only woman in the Politburo, and she's allowed to travel. She's allowed to travel to London in the first place because she's a member of the Nomenklatura, the Soviet elite, the most equal of all the animals, if you like. So we can see immediately that this may not be the chance meeting that it appears to be. And the question arises, are people manipulating these two young people? Are they being pushed around like chess pieces? But our young would-be lovers have people on their side too. One of them is a Russian intelligence officer called Vasily. And this is really my attempt at imagining what the Soviet version of James Bond would be like. What would the Russian James Bond be like? And I think in my head, the Soviet James Bond would be much more clever and cunning and sophisticated than the original, because he'd have to be. He's someone who's been brought up in the Shark Tank and survived the purges of the 1930s, and he would have to be a much more clever and conniving customer than the original James Bond. And above all, they have Greta, who's the heroine of this novel, if you will, the partisan. That's probably her there in red, I suppose. She's in red, signifying danger. She's a very dangerous character, a kind of Nazi hunter, someone tracking down war criminals in the 1960s. And she's hiding in the forest there because she's one of the Forest brothers. She's a Lithuanian partisan. She's one of the guerrilla fighters who held out against the Soviet occupation after the end of World War II. And it's here that we get into a little bit of hopefully interesting real history. And the main bit of historical research, the main work of research that I did here in preparation for this novel was to marry a Lithuanian woman, which means that I've spent quite a lot of time in that country. And it's a fascinating country if you can ever visit. But it's a country where the past casts a long shadow. And if I say that Lithuania was invaded once by Hitler and twice by Stalin in 4 years, you can probably imagine what I'm getting at. And you can probably imagine what the results of that were for the various people who lived there. And the one thing I didn't realize until I visited Lithuania was how bravely people struggled against the Soviet occupation. And in my head, it was, the Iron Curtain fell across Europe, and Stalin, would have no, his power was absolute from the beginning. Of course, it's not true. Lots of people fought against the forces of Joseph Stalin until his death in 1953, and right across the Baltic states and Ukraine and Poland and a number of other places. And it's a bit of forgotten history, not forgotten there, but not very well documented in the West. And it also, I realized with horror as well, there's a kind of horrible moment where I realized that it intersected with British history, because those brave partisans were betrayed by the Cambridge spies, the British spies who defected to the Soviet Union. And a chap called Kim Philby in particular. They were betrayed to their deaths by the turncoats and British intelligence. So the partisan is essentially, it was inspired by a photograph. It's a bit like a sort of, I don't know if you ever did this in any sort of creative writing class, like at school, where I give you the photo and you tell me the backstory, tell me who these people are and what the characters are. And it's a real photo. It's a photo described in chapter 1 of the novel. And I found it in a place called Fort 9 in Kaunas, which is now a museum in the second city of Lithuania. And it's one of those times in your life where you just see a photograph and it just kind of hits you between the eyes. And it was 3 teenage girls, about 16, black and white photo, obviously. And they were obviously friends. They had their arms around each other, and they had done themselves up for the picture, nice makeup, kind of showing a lot of attitude. They had their cigarettes dangling from their mouths. And most importantly, of course, they had German guns in their hands, because they were, we think, Jewish partisans. We don't know their names, but they'd stolen these guns from the Germans. And I think it was a kind of FU to the Germans. They were kind of showing them what they had. And just an incredible photograph, the bravery, and also this sense of fun, because they were young people who were having an adventure, a terribly dangerous time, of course, but they hadn't lost the kind of spirit of youth. And I just sort of felt like I've got to try and write these girls' story. So there's a kind of section of this book is the backstory of the heroine Greta, and that's her on the Eastern Front in World War II. And if it sounds fanciful, then if you just Google Lithuanian partisans, then you'll see an awful lot of young women who were involved in the fighting there. That it's actually fairly realistic. So we've got this long flashback sequence where we're in World War II and we're with these 3 teenage girls. It's the bit I like best of the book. It was the hardest to write, I was trying to get the voice of teenage girls, the unfiltered voice that you don't hear very often. Teenage girls talk differently when there's no adults around, there's no boys around. It's kind of foul-mouthed and funny, and but a very intense friendship. So I did my best to try and get that. It's not something you hear very often in books. So as you probably guessed, this is a somewhat long and complicated book with different stories woven together. I make no apology for it. I think it is a thriller. I hope that it's an entertaining book, but it's not exactly a holiday for the brain. So so if you like historical thrillers, if you like historical novels, but you're not necessarily a thriller writer, maybe give it a try. It's a love story wrapped up in a spy story. It's a story about female revenge as well, and female strength and friendship. So maybe it's for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Now I will ask all the authors to come back on camera, and we'll do a short round robin before we get to the book buzz from the publishers. So we did have one question in the chat from Pam from Wisconsin. Do characters, plot, or setting come to you first? And then what are you reading that you'd like, what book would you like to share with the librarian so they can increase their to be read pile? Katharine, let's circle back to you.
Sure, thanks so much. Do character, plot, or setting come first? I mean, in this case, I would say the character and situation of Bertha's actual history obviously kind of occurred to me at the same time. I am a much more character-driven writer. I'm not good at plot. I mean, I'm going to tell you that as a way for you to get real excited about my book, but I love plot. I love complex structure. It's something I have to work on, whereas character is what just kind of immediately is there for me without having to think about it. I would say in terms of books that I've read recently that I enjoyed, I'm going to recommend two. One is historical fiction, and that is The New Life by Tom Crewe. It's C-R-E-W-E. And I say that because if I say it's Tom Cruise's The New Life, people might get a little confused. It's also set right around 1900, and it's based on some of the actual well, they thought of themselves as scientists, sexologists who were writing about gender and sexuality right then. And it's about queerness and all kinds of fascinating stuff, just beautifully written, amazing. The other one that's a little bit different that I enjoyed recently was Ni Vaz, The Chosen and the Beautiful, which is a fantastical kind of magical retelling of The Great Gatsby that I had somehow missed when it came out. Super fun, really enjoyed it. With a Jordan character who is Chinese American, I believe, or possibly Vietnamese American, I can't recall. So it's a really interesting retelling. And I mean, I could go on about other historical fiction recommendations, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Lauren, plot, character, or setting?
In this book, probably, I suppose the setting, because it just was but all three were really intertwined, but the setting came first. Much like Katharine, I love a good plot. I love a really nicely braided, tied together story. In this case, one was sort of provided to me by the people who wrote the diaries. I would like to recommend a book that came out, I believe, last year, but it came out in, I think, spring of 22, called The Caretakers by Amanda Bester Siegel. It's a really good book. I don't think it got the attention that it deserved. It's about 4 au pairs in Paris, American au pairs, and the way that they deal with the very different kinds of families. But it's beautifully written. It's sophisticated. It's sad. It's funny. It can be a little bit hopeful, a little bit bleak, but it deals with things that I really love in life, including families, children, and French food. So I recommend that if you haven't read it.
Great, thank you. Deborah?
Yeah, I was going to recommend 2 books too, actually. and I have them here. Generation Dread by Britt Ray, a nonfiction book. I just recently read it. It's Finding Purpose in the Age of Climate Crisis is the subtitle, and I thought it was just a really brilliant sort of way to help people navigate such a changing world. And then I'm also reading Women Talking right now by Miriam Taves. I think everyone in Canada is just very excited that that Sarah Polley won an Oscar. So I haven't watched a movie in 2 years since my child was born, but when I do get to watch a movie, that's going to be the one I watch. And so I'm getting ready by reading the book.
Great, thank you. And Patrick?
Hello. I think it's character first, actually, oddly. Plot's important to me, and I wouldn't start writing until I've got the whole thing mapped out. It starts on a big whiteboard with lots of arrows, things like that. I don't know how you can write a proper, complicated plot with a proper ending unless you do it like that. Although it seems to me that lots of people do make it up as they go along, but I don't know how you do that. But I think actually I think the characters do come first for me. Can I recommend a book on the spirit of like in the genre of like thrillers that are hopefully not rubbish? There's a great book that I just read it because I liked the cover. I'd never heard of it. It's by James Buchan, not John Buchan of the 39 Steps, but James Buchan, same spelling, and it's called A Good Place to Die in the UK. It may be called The Persian Bride in the United States. They may have changed the title. It's a love story set in revolutionary Iran, and it's an imperfect book. But the first third of it is the most astonishing, intense, febrile, wonderful prose that I've read for 20 years. It's just outstanding. So A Good Place to Die / The Persian Bride.
Great, thank you. And thanks to all our authors. And now I will invite Annie Mays on and stick around for a quick book buzz.
Hello, everybody. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking us through today. To our authors, I wish I could just listen to this panel for the rest of the afternoon. Much more fun than the actual afternoon I'm going to be having. But I appreciate all 5 of you. I appreciate everybody tuned in today to listen to our authors and now to our book buzz. Thank you for being here. I'm Annie Mazes, FYI. I'm going to put in the chat the PDF for all of these slides that you'll be seeing, and also a link to an Edelweiss collection with all the titles that everyone's going to be talking about. It disappeared. If you would like to reach out to me about any of the books I'm talking about, please feel free. First up, I'm going to be talking about Night Bloom from the author of Reese's Book Club Click, His Only Wife, Peace Adzomede. She returns with a moving novel about the unbreakable power of female friendship. There are 2 inseparable young women in Ghana. They become estranged after one moves to the United States. There's a crisis that brings them back together. This is a riveting depiction of class and family in Ghana. It's a very compelling exploration of memory, and a really eye-opening story of an African-born woman in the United States. It's beautifully written, just like her debut novel, and perfect for readers of The Girl with the Louding Voice, Americana, and of Women in Salt. Next is Goodbye Earl. Yes, definitely related to the song. This has also got empowering themes of female friendship, resilience, recovery after abusive relationships, and the importance of community. It's from the Half-Blown Rose author, Lisa Cross-Smith. Definitely a great book club book. I think it's going to inspire a lot of conversation. It follows 4 best friends through 2 unforgettable summers, 15 years apart. It's a funeral for all of the Earls out there, the abusive men who think they can get away with anything but are wrong, and a celebration of enduring sisterhood. Next is Inside the Wolf, which is set in the rural South, American South. Inside the Wolf is a novel about 2 accidental gun deaths and the true costs inflicted by the myths of masculinity and hunting on a small town community. Rachel Ruskin never intended to return to her family's tobacco farm in North Carolina, but when her academic career flames out, she has no choice. In the wake of family loss, she is alone, haunted by memories, ghosts, and Shiloh's buried history of racism and violence. Amy Rowland is originally from rural North Carolina herself, and she evokes the beauty of the setting and the vibrancy of its oral traditions while remaining clear-eyed about the dark side of both. Andrea, side note, yes, this is Goodbye Earl is the Chicks song. Goodbye Earl, that's sort of the inspiration behind it. My next title is I Meant It Once. This is a very sharp, witty debut collection of short stories. Kate Doyle captures precisely the time in life of so many young women when they're caught in the in-between. They're sort of preoccupied by nostalgia for past relationships, friends, romance, roommates, all kinds of relationships, while trying to move forward into a uncertain future that they haven't quite mapped out yet. For fans of Otesha Moshfegh, Patricia Lockwood, and Melissa Bank. And my last title is The Apology, part ghost story, part family epic. It's an incisive tale of sisterhood and diaspora, reaching back to the days of Japanese colonialism and the Korean War, told through the singular voice of a defiant, funny, and unforgettable centenarian who receives a letter and 10 days later finds herself thrust into the afterlife, fighting to head off a curse that will otherwise devastate generations to come. That's it for me. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Loberg from Soho Press, and I'm excited to share with you some of our big summer titles from each of our imprints. I will get started first with our teen imprint. In June, we have Ride or Die by Gail Agnes Musikavanu. This is a really fun read that's part high-octane action thriller and part rom-com with a sweet twist on the friends to lovers trope. Best friends Loli Crawford and Ryan Pope are known as the Bonnie and Clyde of their high school. They're always going kind of against the grain, seeking adventures and thrills, and up to no good sometimes. One day, there's this big party and everything changes when Loli meets a mysterious boy in a coat closet who goes by the name X and challenges her to a thrilling game that she cannot resist. Loli and X enter into an anonymous correspondence and a series of escalating dares that pushes free-spirited, thrill-chasing Loli to her limits. And as things spin out of control, she risks losing her best friend. Ride or Die is Gail Agnes's ode to Gen Z. It's very fast-paced and captures that fun and high-stakes spirit of being a teen. What's more, the book centers a character that Gail Agnes never really saw in books growing up. Loli is a Black female protagonist who gets to have so much fun. She makes mistakes and she can be a little bit messy because nobody, especially at that chaotic stage of growing up, is perfect. Another fun element is that each chapter begins with a specific song, so there is a full playlist accompanying the book. Ride or Die is a thrill ride of a novel and an excellent choice for fans of Ace of Spades, Grace D. Lee, and whimsical action stories. Next, please. Moving to our crime imprint, in June, we also have A Disappearance in Fiji by Nalima Rao. This is a stunning debut mystery that Alexander McCall Smith calls utterly charming. It received a starred review from Publishers Weekly, and it really has all the hallmarks of an instant classic. This is set in 1914 Fiji and follows 25-year-old Indian Police Sergeant Akal Singh, who recently fell from grace at his illustrious posting in Hong Kong, and now, as punishment, he's relegated to what should be a paradise in Fiji, but he hates it and wishes for nothing more than to get back to his former glory in Hong Kong. So when an Indian indentured woman goes missing from a plantation, Akal's assigned the case. He's told not to push too hard, don't upset anyone or mess with the status quo, just kind of do the bare minimum on investigating this case. But as he's investigating, he comes face to face with the brutal realities of indentured servitude in Fiji, the horrible working conditions, and racism on the plantations. The author Nalima is of Indian descent. She was born in Fiji and grew up in Australia, and the novel is inspired by her great-grandparents who participated in the indentured servitude program that in reality exploited thousands of impoverished people in India who were hoping to find a better life in Fiji. So this obviously gets into some serious topics of racism and labor exploitation, but it's done really tactfully through this compelling mystery, the journey of this charming investigator, and narration that's both humorous and socially engaged. It's really immersive, shows the deep research that the author did in Fiji. I would hand this to fans of Sujata Massey, Vidya Yu, and immersive and rare international mysteries. Next, please. From our literary imprint, Soho Press, in July, we have Half-Life of a Stolen Sister by Rachel Cantor. You may recognize the Bronte sisters on here, and that's because this is a fictionalization of the lives of the Bronte siblings, including the three sisters here and their brother Branwell. It's anchored by key moments of their lives, from childhood when their mother and two eldest siblings passed away, to their formative young adult years when they began trying to find themselves and writing more professionally, to adulthood when Charlotte survived the deaths of her three remaining siblings. Rachel Cantor reimagines their lives, placing them in a ambiguous time setting. It's mostly 20th century, so it's pretty recognizable in some cases, and it makes them feel a lot closer to our contemporary world. The novel's told through an eclectic mix of diaries, letters, TV and radio interviews, and other forms to create an evocative portrait where the Brontes feel real and intimately familiar, like close family friends, and we get to immerse ourselves in their imaginative adventures, heartbreaks, complex relationships, and journeys of self-discovery. It's a novel full of sadness, just as their lives were, but there's also a lot of fun, joy, and love that we see through the siblings' camaraderie, and ultimately, Charlotte's journey to finding a love she never thought possible. Fans of the Brontes will have a great time peeking into their reimagined lives here, but beyond that, this is a great read for fans of experimental forms, fiction about literature, and poignant stories that make you feel something. Next, please. That's all I have for you today. Please go ahead to NetGalley and Edelweiss to find all these titles, and please visit our virtual booth at the PRH Spring Books and Author Fest next Tuesday to find videos from some of these authors and more info on summer and fall books. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I am Golda from Norton. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to all of the authors for taking the time to speak with us. I'm here to tell you about a few titles that are coming out this summer. But if you want to hear even more, I presented on the Book List Adult Faves webinar in February and at the Alma Book Buzz a couple weeks ago. So I'll put the links to those recordings in the chat after I present. So first, just a reminder that Library Reads votes for May titles are due by April 1st. I especially enjoyed the debut mystery, The Night Flowers, which I hope you'll check out on Edelweiss or NetGalley. If you like legal thrillers, you should look for Central Park West by James Comey, and go for Blue Skies by T.C. Boyle for satire, climate change, and dysfunctional families. And votes for June titles are due by May 1st, and we have some more heavy hitters here, including new novels from Andre Dubus III and Claire Fuller. And of course, I hope you will read Girlfriend on Mars, which you just heard about from Deborah Willis. And we have Finn Murphy's new memoir, Rocky Mountain High. And you can find digital arcs for all of these on Edelweiss and NetGalley. Though Long Ago is a new standalone mystery by Michael McGarity, the author of the Kevin Kearney mystery series. When Raymond's younger sister Barbara disappears and the police turn up no leads, he returns home from a stint in Vietnam, determined to figure out what happened. Embarking on a search that takes him from majestic Montana ranchlands and glittering Hollywood to the mean streets of LA, Ray is forced to confront his worst nightmare. This should appeal to fans of Peter Heller, James Lee Burke, and of course McGarity's previous Kevin Kearney series. Disturbance is a genre-bending debut novel that follows a woman's attempt to heal from an abusive relationship with the help of black magic. Alone in a new town, the narrator falls in with her neighbor and her witchy friend, exploring nascent supernatural powers as the boundaries of reality seem to shift. When the creaks and hums of her apartment escalate into something more violent, she realizes that she may have brought her toxic ex-boyfriend's presence back to haunt her. With emotional depth and clarity, Disturbance explores the fallout of abuse and twists witchcraft and horror into a powerful narrative of one woman's struggle to return to herself. Daughter of the Dragon by Yunta Wang is a biography of Anna May Wong, old Hollywood's most famous Chinese-American actress, a screen siren who captivated global audiences. Challenging the racist perceptions of Wong as a dragon lady, Madame Butterfly, or a China doll, Wang's biography is a fascinating work of history that reflects the raging anti-Chinese xenophobia, unabashed sexism, and ageism toward women that defined both Hollywood and America in Wong's all too brief 56 years on Earth. The Museum of Human History is from Tin House Books. This was inspired by the tales of Sleeping Beauty or Little Briar Rose. After nearly drowning, 8-year-old Maeve Wilhelm falls into a strange comatose state. As years pass, it becomes clear that Maeve is not physically aging. A wide cast of characters finds themselves pulled toward Maeve, each believing that her mysterious sleep holds the answers to their life's most pressing questions. Weaving together speculative elements and classic fables and exploring urgent issues from the opioid epidemic to the hazards of biotech to the obsession with self-improvement and remaining forever young, this fascinating novel explores how time shapes us. There are always way more books in a season than I can present, so I hope you'll check out our summer catalog on Edelweiss. And then we just had our fall sales conference a few weeks ago, and that catalog is now available on Edelweiss. I'm especially excited about new novels from Anne Enright and Bonnie Jo Campbell. We're launching our new Norton Shorts series with books by Taya Miles and Ashley Shue. And you will hear from both of those authors, plus Bonnie Jo Campbell, at Library Journal Day of Dialogue in May. I also do print ARC giveaways in the library newsletter, which you can subscribe to through the link on this slide. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll send it over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Golda. My name again is Chris Vicari of Union Square and Company, and these are the books. Quick recap for spring on the next slide. Not So Perfect Strangers, an updated homage to Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train by L.S. Stratton, who will be joining us at the Texas Library Association conference, should you be attending next month. A Shadow Crown is book 2 in what Booklist starred review called the, quote, rich fantasy world of the Broken Blade series. And if looking to level up, pivot, or re-enter the workforce, nothing is out of reach when you get yourself on brand with author Eliza Licht. Next slide, please. It is The Partisan. You just heard from Patrick talk about his book. So come in from the cold, my friends, and read this Cold War era spy thriller that publishes weekly, and that starred review said is, quote, Dr. Zhivago meets James Bond. And again, that Lee Childs said is, quote, up there with the best in the genre. Next slide, please. Check in on May 16th to Hotel 21 and meet Noelle, a friendly hotel housekeeper who, when you're not looking, may steal from you and other guests. Small stuff, a lipstick here, a hair clip there. That is until she becomes friends with her new colleagues at her 21st hotel. Not because they're rival thieves, no, they are nice women with normal lives. They make her wonder what it might be like to have real friends. That is, unless her old habits return. Hotel 21 is a story about resilience that I liked from page 1, and Booklist just gave it a starred review. Vote for it for Library Reads. Next up is Truly, Darkly, Deeply, a different take on the usual serial killer novel about a young girl named Sophie, who upon visiting the man she helped put behind bars for life, this man who dated her mom, who she once loved like a father. Now, 20 years after he went to prison, she begins to wonder if he was actually a killer. The twists keep coming in Truly, Darkly, Deeply by Victoria Selman, out in June. Next slide, please. In September, we have The Dance of the Dolls, tells the story of Olivia and Clara, identical twin ballerinas, rehearsing for the comic ballet Coppelia at a recently opened theater. Now, while they are different in many ways, Olivia is meticulous, Clara is disorganized. They are not rivals, they truly love each other, but eventually one man's love means that one of the sisters will soon be in danger, and it is their support for each other that will matter most of all, as the story of Coppelia and the Dancing Doll threatens to become a dark and sinister reality in this wonderful debut by author Lucy Ashe. Next slide, please. It's fun, it's frothy, it's Fling by Joseph Murray. Tara and Colin considered themselves soulmates, but after 6 years of marriage and failed attempts to have children, both just felt their best days were behind them. So each on their own, desperate to shake things up, find themselves on a new dating app called Fling, where married people can find discreet, anonymous, faithful affairs online, as long as there are no photos, no real names, and please God, no distinguishing details. Soon, Colin and Tara are each sent 100% perfect match profiles, and they realize what they're looking for might just be closer than they think. Next slide, please. The Temple of Fortuna, book 3 in the Wolf Den trilogy by Elodie Harper. Our lead character, Amara's journey has taken her far, from a slave in Pompey's wolf den to a high-powered courtesan in Rome. But her story in this recreation of an ancient world is not over yet and continues to thrill, although it is the year AD 79 and mighty Mount Vesuvius is about to arrive. Next slide, please. After all that ballet, online dating, and volcano activity, let's eat. It was joyfully announced a couple of weeks ago that we are publishing Let's Eat by Dan Pelosi, known on social media at Grossy Pelosi. It hit the #1 spot on Amazon Movers and Shakers after his book announcement on Instagram. Dan's debut cookbook is as full of living, laughing, and loving as any cookbook possibly could be. It's a warm hug of home cooking with 101 of his nearest and dearest Italian-American recipes, including how to craft your ultimate big Italian sandwich. OMG, Let's Eat publishes in September of 2023. And next slide, please. It's time to bake your heart out with Dan Langan. In his debut cookbook, Dan shares nostalgic vibe and a cutting-edge approach with 100 recipes for game-changing versions of familiar classics, plus unique creations and the pro secrets that make his bakes better. Former winner of the Cake Wars, regular guest on Good Morning America, Dan Langan has been baking his heart out since the age of 5 and can take anyone's skills and make them as enticing as the treats themselves, like these. Next slide, please. These delightful gingerbread cutouts. The next slide will give you my contact information should you want to be in touch. And my friends, those are the books. And that's the way it is on A Book for Every Reader today, March 28th, 2023. Before we sign off, thank you to our authors, Katharine, Lauren, Deborah, and Patrick for joining us today. Thanks to Annie from Hachette, Erica from Soho Press, Golda from Norton Company for bringing us together, to our host, Jennifer Winberry, and thanks to all of you wonderful librarians for joining us today. We will see you at the next event. Have a nice day.